yours. Yeah, that's what she's saying. Yeah.
Okay, we ready for this?
I think so.
Very good. Okay. Apologize, we are just a few minutes late. We do have a workshop scheduled for today by our Human Resources Department. I know this has been long anticipated and excited for this. It's an updated report on the classification and compensation review in that regard. So, with that, Shelley, turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council members, and staff. I'm Shelley Buggy, the HR Director for the city. We scheduled this workshop to give you an update on the classification and compensation project that we've been engaged in with Gallagher Consulting since last March. And we've been working with Alan Johanning, one of their senior consultants. So he's going to be doing the presentation here in a minute. I did give you some handouts of the slides that he's going to be going over. So the study is really to evaluate the city's pay structure, our pay grades, our minimum, mid, and maximum of the pay ranges, and to look at comparable pay markets for the jobs that we could match to. As you would imagine, it is difficult sometimes to do job matches, apples to apples, and so that's what Gallagher has been helping us do, and where we can match to those, and then we'll fit the other jobs within that structure. We do have a new city pay schedule that is in the works that we're finalizing as part of this project, and a compensation philosophy policy. The city hasn't had a compensation philosophy in place, so we are drafting that. That's going to be on your December 19th agenda for your review and approval. The study has also pointed out some additional job classifications that we need to do a little bit more work on. There's some job families and job descriptions that we're going to need to dig into. We've started that work on some of those job families, and then we'll also continue that work after the project is over with Gallagher part. So there'll be some ongoing work. Before I turn the presentation over to Alan, I wanted to introduce Matt Oram. Matt is our new compensation and budget analyst. And he just started with us. It's a new position for FY24, and he just started beginning of October. He brings a wealth of compensation knowledge and budget analyst experience, both from state and from private industry. So we're super glad that he's on our team to kind of dig in and help us with compensation and budget issues. So he's jumped into this project as well. So Alan, who I'm going to introduce here in a minute, Matt, Raylyn, and I are going to be available during the workshop if there's discussion or you have any questions. And with that, we're ready with Alan. I want to introduce Alan Johanning. He's a senior consultant with Gallagher HR and Compensation Consulting. He's coming to us today from a location in Colorado. So, and he's going to be sharing his screen, and so those are the screenshots that I have passed out, so you can have something to take notes on as he goes through his presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Alan.
Excellent. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me here this evening to walk through this information with you. Like Shelley had said, we've been working with the city for the last several months in gathering a bunch of data and working with Shelley and her team to kind of understand what the data says, and then hopefully continuing to work with them on implementing any of the changes and findings and things like that we've come across. So I've got a short slide deck here that I'm planning to walk through with you. As questions come up, we can certainly hold off till the end. If you'd like to interrupt in the middle, that's totally fine as well. So just whatever works best for you guys. Can everybody see my screen as well?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So just kind of what we'll run through here today, kind of a project overview, our approach that we're taking, discuss benchmark jobs, the market data, what were the various survey sources that we looked at, and what kind of data analysis did we do with that? What did the initial findings tell us based on the information that we were able to gather? And then really jumping into recommendations, implementations, and next steps. So like Shelley said, I am part of Gallagher's Human Resources and Compensation Consulting team. And even within that, I am part of our public sector and higher education team. So while Gallagher is certainly a multinational company with 40,000 people spread across the globe, we're a team of about 40 or 45 individuals that are solely focused on doing this type of work only within the public sector and higher education realm. We do this work nationwide. We've got folks on our team as far east as Richmond, Virginia, and I'm about as far west as we go with Denver, Colorado. So we're spread all across the nation. We work with various cities and counties across the nation, again, solely focused on that public sector side, and have certainly worked with other organizations and cities and counties and municipalities within the state of Idaho. So just, I bring this up to say, while we are a large team and have the resources of a large company, our immediate team is very, very small, focused on this niche within the industry. So just kind of a high-level project overview. We kind of spread the project out into a couple different swim lanes. At the beginning of the project, we really worked with Shelley and her team to understand what the current compensation philosophy or supporting strategies or policies and things like that looked like. We collected a bunch of information from job descriptions to policies and things like that, just to make sure that we had as clear of an understanding as possible of what the current state is, so that when we went to the external market, we felt like we were getting as close to apples comparisons as possible. Once we kind of felt like we had the material and kind of familiarized ourselves with it, like Shelley touched on just a minute ago, we then went into the process of selecting benchmark jobs. Anytime we do these studies, we certainly don't try to get information on every single position that exists within the organization. One, it's just not doable, and two, that's just not where the value add is. So we wanted to make sure that we selected a good number of benchmark jobs, and I've got a couple slides that'll kind of walk through what our guiding principles were there. Once we had the benchmark jobs selected, we continued to work with Shelley and her team in defining the labor market. We wanted to make sure that we were pulling information from our various survey sources and pulling from certain markets that were going to be most applicable to the city. Once we pulled all that information, we spent quite a bit of time doing a competitive analysis, kind of comparing what the city's information looked like compared to the external market. And then we're really kind of over in that third column right now, that project finalization and recommendation. So we're creating kind of that detailed plan of implementation with Shelley and her team, doing these kind of presentations here today. And then at the end of everything, we'll certainly be sure that we're delivering any training or any materials or things like that to definitely Shelley and her team, but other departments and leadership within the city to make sure that they understand what we did, why we did, and how they're going to be able to sustain it moving forward. So this slide just kind of talks about some best practice approaches that we took throughout this process. This is not certainly something that we're not reinventing the wheel on. These are kind of our best practice approaches across all organizations that do this type of work. In terms of when we're matching data, when we're pulling data, and what we're able to do with the data, we are held to the Federal Trade and Commission standards and Department of Labor standards to make sure that any data that we're pulling, we feel like we've got enough data matches there to draw sound conclusions off of. In terms of matching those jobs to the external market, kind of using the job descriptions and job documentation that we had from the city, if we went to those external data sources and felt like we had an 80% job match, we felt like that was a good enough match to draw comparisons on. Following professional accepted guidelines for defining labor markets, while we did do a custom survey reaching out to specific cities and counties within the state, we also wanted to make sure that we were defining labor markets appropriately for those published survey sources that we also utilized. In addition to the published survey sources that we pull, we also make sure that we're using trend factor data that we're getting from the Department of Labor and World at Work. So anytime we're pulling data, we know that that data is as of an effective date, and that doesn't always line up directly with the implementation date. So we purchase surveys on an annual basis that tell us, broken out by industry, broken out by region, broken out by geographic areas, what kind of salary movement have we seen in terms of grades and ranges, what kind of salary movement have we seen in terms of actual salary adjustments, and we're adjusting that data forward so that it is as real time as possible. We're also using ERI, which stands for Economic Research Institute, to one, pull salary information, but to also adjust any of the data that we have to go more regional or national on to cost of labor for Caldwell, Idaho. Again, doing everything we can to make sure we're giving as much of an apples-to-apples comparison as possible whenever we're pulling this information. In terms of some guidelines that we use for defining our benchmark jobs, these are kind of, we wanted to make sure that we were kind of checking yes next to every one of these. Like I said, it's never our goal to collect market information on every single position with an organization. One, it's just because there are unique titles within every organization that we're not going to be able to get information on. So that really kind of gets down there to that green box. We wanted to make sure that the jobs that we were selecting and the jobs that we were attempting to go out and get information on, we felt confident that we were going to be able to do that because they were jobs that are found in most organizations. We also wanted to be sure that any of the jobs that we selected were representative of the entire employee population. So we wanted to make sure that all levels within the organization were represented. So from the most entry-level position up to the most senior-level position. And we also wanted to be sure that all job families and all job functions were represented. So as you think about an organization horizontally across finance, HR, IT, public works, and all those different areas, we wanted to make sure that they were all covered as well. We also wanted to be sure for those highly populated positions that we were checking that. And then kind of beyond that, kind of a one-off that we did is some of those jobs that may be hard to recruit for, you're having retention issues, you're having high turnover issues, we wanted to keep our eye on those as well. In terms of kind of collecting the data, what we did is, again, we used the job matches and the job descriptions that we were provided from the city, and we compared those to job summaries that are provided in those published survey sources to make sure that we were not just matching on title, but we were doing as much as we could to match on content. The date that we're using currently is the first of the year, so any of the data that we found, we used whatever the effective date of the survey was, and we aged that forward using those trend factors that I talked about just a little bit ago. And then again, we adjusted all the information geographically to make sure that it lined up with the cost of labor for Caldwell, Idaho. In terms of selecting our labor market, we wanted to make sure that we were selecting like organizations in terms of the type of organization, size of the organization, geographic location, services provided, and then again, really some of those aspirational organizations sometimes were organizations in which you lose talent to or recruit talent from. Were really kind of, again, the guiding principles in selecting the external market data that we did for this work. So in terms of the external market data, we collected data from a couple different sources. We administered a custom survey in which Gallagher actually sent a list of the benchmark positions with job descriptions and things like that out to individuals at these various cities and counties and asked them to send us back their closest matches that they had. Typically, whenever we do these, anytime we get about a 25 to 30% response rate, that's typically what we see with these custom surveys. So on here, you'll see the 4 organizations that we heard back from on those custom surveys. In terms of information that we used in conjunction with that, we also have access to a number of published survey sources that we purchase on an annual basis. These are third-party companies that conduct these nationwide salary surveys across many industries, across the entire nation. So anytime we get a match for those could theoretically be hundreds of data points, depending on how many organizations responded to that. So a list of those are comp data, Mercer, Wage Access, Willis Towers Watson, and then again, that Economic Research Institute. So our goal is to get as many data points as possible to where we feel like we can make sound conclusions on each of the positions that were included. Whenever we go out and get the data, we're looking at it in a few different ways. So one of the ways that we're looking at it is we're actually pulling base salary information. So when we're pulling that, again, lots and lots of data points, and we're going to get what the 25th percentile, what the 50th percentile, and what the 75th percentile is of actual pay reported to those salary surveys, or based on the information we collected from the custom survey, we were able to back into those figures. In addition to that, we also attempt to get salary range information. So not only are we interested in what our organization's actually paying employees, We also want to understand what are the average minimums, midpoints, and maximums of those survey sources as well, so that we can kind of look at it two different ways. One of the things that we target pay at is at that 50th percentile or that market median. So while we get into some high-level average figures here coming up, you could have individuals that are showing, when we look at average pay for your incumbents compared to average pay or market median that we're getting from survey sources, that you guys are lagging, but that could be because that's a single incumbent position or a low number of incumbent positions, whereas the individuals may be very early in their career, whereas the information we're gathering from the external market, those individuals may be higher. So it may appear on actual pay that they may be lagging, but if we look at the minimums, midpoints, and maximums, it could be that your guys' overall grades and ranges are still very appropriate for there. So anytime we're doing these comparisons, because again, what we don't know when we're going to the external market is for people that are reporting their salary information to those surveys, we don't know those individuals' tenure, we don't know their background, we don't know their experience. Those are all of things that go into why an employee is paid what they are. So when we talk about competitiveness of your pay versus the external market, we talk about some acceptable variances there. If you're plus or minus 5%, we find that to be highly competitive. Plus or minus 10%, you're still competitive. Plus or minus 15%, you're starting to get to that area of possible misalignment. But again, it may not necessarily be it. Your internal incumbents may be very different than the makeup of the external incumbents that we found. So we try to give ourselves a degree of variance there whenever we jump into this. So based on our initial findings, we found that overall the city is very, very competitive with the external market based on the data that we found. So down here on this side, this first tab is looking at actual salaries. So when we compare on average your incumbent salaries to the 25th, 50th, 75th percentiles, at the 50th percentile, you guys are barely lagging the external market. Again, there are going to be certain jobs and certain roles that are lagging the market. There's going to be certain jobs and certain roles that are ahead of the market. And there's going to be certain jobs that are kind of right within that 5, 10, 15% wheelhouse. But when we look at that on average across the entire city, we find that you guys are very, very well aligned with the external market in terms of both actual salary and salary ranges. So as we think about what those initial findings are telling us and then kind of moving towards implementations and recommendations and things like that, like Shelley said, we've been working with her team to take this information that we have, kind of overlay it with what's going on there at the city. And one of the current recommendations or implementation options that we're looking at are increasing pay grades 1 through 6 at the minimum, midpoint, and maximum by 3%. So that's not saying that we're giving a 3% across the board to all incumbents within those roles. We're saying we're just going to adjust those grades and ranges by 3% at the minimum, midpoint, and maximum. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to evaluate how all jobs fit into that new structure. So the two big factors that we're going to use when determining where a job falls within the structure is what is the grade of best fit based on market. So that tells us one thing. But we also want to make sure that we're not just totally throwing a wrench in your guys' internal hierarchy of positions, so that we're also taking into account kind of your internal worth and your internal hierarchy for those roles. Anytime we do these compensation studies, we very much talk about them in terms of a mix of an art and science. Again, no two organizations are exactly the same. Data is not going to be a perfect answer. So the science piece of it is really the information that we were able to gather from those external data sources. But then the art piece comes in. So yes, we understand what the data is saying here, but we need to make sure that it fits your individual organization. So we've continued to work with Shelley and her team to kind of make sure that we're using a balanced approach in determining how positions fall within the external, within the new structure, or the amended structure moving forward. Like Shelley also touched on, we're also working with her to draft a policy as well as a compensation philosophy and criteria for moving employees through pay ranges. We want to make sure that as part of the end deliverables for this, we've delivered tools and resources that are going to allow Shelley and her team in HR, as well as leaders across the organization, to maintain this structure moving forward. And then that last bullet is kind of once the new structure is fully adopted, Shelley and her team will continue to work on them implementing and really getting to employee impact analysis and things like that. As we move into and start to think about implementation and impact analysis, we typically look at this a few different ways and give various options in terms of how you want to implement this. This slide right here kind of walks through three various options, kind of talks about the benefits and the drawbacks of each one of them. The first one that we always do is for jobs that were in roles where the range was increased, or for jobs that went into new ranges or new grades, we want to make sure that every employee is at least paid at the minimum of those pay grades or at minimum of those pay ranges. So that's kind of the first approach that we say is what would it take just to make sure that we've got all employees within the structure, within the range of their new pay grade. Obviously, that's going to be the most cost advantageous. It's going to be the most cost minimal, but it could result in some sort of compression there towards the bottom of the range. So we typically, again, that's one of the options that we look at there. Another option that we look at is we want to basically take into account what an individual's experience is. So we may be able to give information that says, taking into account one individual might have 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, where would we expect to see them within a range based on their years of service, to kind of give you an idea where an individual may fall. Now, again, an individual may be lagging because they may have performance issues, or there may be a number of issues that lead to individuals, but again, we'll at least show, based on experience, where would we expect people to be. When we do those experience calculations, we're going to break those out typically in two different costing models. We'll do one that says we're going to place you within the range with a cap at midpoint of the range. We're not going to adjust anybody based on experience above the midpoint of a range. Again, do that to kind of help with costing. But also at the end of this, anytime we do these market studies, you can theoretically think about the midpoint of a range being the market competitive wage. Because we anchored everything to the 50th percent of market and assigned jobs using that ideology plus the internal hierarchy of positions, doing these market studies, the goal is to get people or ensure your population is within a market competitive wage. So a lot of organizations say, as part of this, we're not going to increase anybody above midpoint based on experience. Again, the last one is we're going to bring anybody within or at least show organizations where individuals should fall within the range, and we'll cap them at maximum. Obviously, that's going to be the most costly, but it is going to spread that employee population out based on their experience. So these will certainly be three different models that we'll continue to work with Shelley and her team on costing out for the city. In terms of a compensation philosophy, like Shelley said, the city doesn't currently have a formal compensation philosophy. And what a compensation philosophy is really kind of those guiding principles and that guiding light as to why an organization pays people the way that they pay them, and kind of what are the guidelines that they use in determining that. So anytime we talk about a compensation philosophy, it can go from a one-page document, from a couple paragraph document to very, very robust, but it doesn't need to be. It's very much, again, just that guiding light, guiding principles on why an organization pays what they pay and what they do to ensure that they're paying externally competitive, internally equitable, and those kind of things. So as you think about key components that go into a compensation philosophy, you want to make sure that you're paying market competitive. You want to make sure that you're treating people the same. You have a sense of internal equity. You want to make sure that employees that are joining your organizations, that they've got a sense of career progression, that if they join the organization at an entry-level role and their desires to stay with the city for a long period of time, that they can kind of map out what their career may look like. You want to make sure that you're letting them know that you're doing these types of studies on a certain basis, that you're basing information on market research, you're continually improving these things. It's not kind of, we put this together, we're going to shove it in a drawer, we're not going to revisit it for 10 years, and we'll come back and figure out what it is. That you really want to make sure that you're basing these decisions on sound data, and that you're also continually improving anything that you're putting into place. And then the last one, you want to make sure that anything you're putting into place is legally compliant. So in terms of FLSA, exempt versus non-exempt employees, pay equity, all those kind of things, you want to make sure that you're keeping an eye on that as well. So kind of thinking about it from a different standpoint, while those are the key components, this is why comp philosophies are important to have and how it can really help an organization. It should help support your business strategy. This should be in line with what your business strategy is. It should help aiding and attracting top talent. If you're very transparent and out there on what your goals of a comp philosophy is or a compensation package is, hopefully that's going to help with recruiting. Should help increase employee engagement and motivation, kind of getting back to that career progression. If employees feel like they can continue to grow either vertically within the organization or horizontally as they look for different areas in which they may be interested in, if they feel like that growth opportunity is there, hopefully that should help with employee engagement and motivation. It helps make sure that you're paying everybody fair and equitable. Increases retention, talent development, again, really getting back to that career progression piece. Job ranges really should help kind of manage labor cost. If you're making sure that everybody's kind of following the same guidelines, you're kind of putting that minimum, midpoint, and maximum. There's only so much you're willing to pay for certain roles. And here are guidelines as to where you may find employees within the range. Hopefully that's going to help reduce labor cost and kind of keep people from getting way out in front of what they should be paying individuals. And then again, gets back to that legally and regulatory compliance, and then should hopefully help promote transparency and communication with your employees. So just a couple quick examples of some tools and resources that we'll continue to work with Shelley and her team on and certainly leave them with. This is just kind of a high-level overview of where you may expect to see certain people within ranges based on their experience, based on their education, based on their performance and that kind of stuff. So it really talks about here in terms of a majority of your population typically is going to fall kind of within that middle tri-tile there. Employees at the low end of the range should be more early in their career or early within the new role that they're in. Employees here that you're going to find right around that 50th percentile are going to be those fully experienced employees. They've been in their role for quite some time. They've got education. They've got experience. And then really those employees that start to get towards the maximum of the range or towards the top end of the range, those really should be reserved for your super top performing employees, your very long tenured employees, because as employees continue to grow, as they go to new roles, they should always kind of, if they're at the top of a range in grade 2 and they get promoted to grade 3, they're going to fall back in the range and they're going to continue to grow within that. So really for those employees to get to the top end, it's really, again, reserved for those very top end, high earning, or high performing employees that have been in their role for a long time. Another tool that we want to make sure that we're leaving Shelley and her team with, as well as the organization, are tools to, again, to kind of administer the pay and make sure that people are kind of staying in line. This is a very simple tool that is kind of a salary estimator tool. So when we understand where an employee gets hired into, we understand the role that they're coming into. So whatever grade that they fall into, we know that there's a minimum, a midpoint, a maximum for that grade. We evaluate what that individual's experience is. So what is their experience either internally for promotion purposes or externally for people that you're hiring in compared to the minimum qualifications of the position. And then we give them credit beyond the minimum qualifications. Typically, we find that per year credit somewhere between 2 to 4%. So this kind of gives leaders and HR an idea of this is how we're going to treat all hires or promotions or things like that as consistent as possible and kind of give some guardrails on what job offers and things like that may look like. So that's really all I have today. Again, the intent of this was to kind of give you an idea of the work that we've been working on with Shelley and her team, the last final steps that are still kind of in process and taking place, and then ultimately what we're hoping to deliver to Shelley, her team, and the rest of the city.
Thank you so much. That was extremely informational. So any questions from council for Mr. Oh, just took his name off, for Alan. Councilor Stoddard, did you have a?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Alan, a couple of questions. First of all, forgive me, in my prior life, I was a Deloitte II student, and we had people come in every 5 to 10 years to help us out with our manning tables and our salaries and everything else. The only 3 items I don't notice on here is the number of people in each department, the job description of those people, and of course the business model. Now, when I'm talking about number of people in each department, and I'll use the French fry business that I'm used to, if you're making 300 million pounds for for the McDonald's group, and your competitor is only making 50 million pounds, obviously your quality control folks would be a lot less than the 50 million pound operation versus the 300 million pounds. So how do you address the differences there relative to the salaries?
So again, that's where we try to get as many data points as possible. Those cities that were identified for custom surveys that we sent out, we wanted to make sure that we were trying to identify those areas that were most like the city of Caldwell. And then from those external data sources, I mean, we're not going to be able to always get to that level of detail, but we are able to get to what industry are they working in, geographically, where is it located, what's the profit, not-for-profit status look like. So again, that's why we try to get as many data points as we can, and then we analyze those for outliers and things like that that may throw things off. So the goal is, again, to get multiple data points so that we don't have any single piece throwing off something like that.
Okay, would you look at page 5 on your survey sources? Ada County, for instance, to me would be the difference between a 300 million pound contract with McDonald's and a 50 million pound. I wouldn't think that we'd even be close to Ada County, would we, on the highway district, based on volume of jobs they have to do and services?
This list that we used here was a list that we worked with the city on identifying. So, I mean, we sent the roles out, we sent them what the job descriptions and things like that were, and asked them to send our data back. So, I mean, we can certainly go in and look at the specifics of each one of these to see if anything's throwing it off. But that's certainly something that we work with Shelley and team on in identifying these organizations.
Because obviously some departments that have, say, 20 people in versus 5 people, there should be a big difference in the supervisors' accommodations as far as salary and all that. Would you say that?
That could be one, yeah. I mean, that certainly could be a factor that goes into determining that. I mean, we, again, that's why we try not to hang our hat on any single source of data.
And Shelley, you and I have talked about this. Have we got anything in the plans to maybe look at each department relative to their job descriptions, their responsibilities, number of people, and all that kind of stuff? That's pretty important, so.
Yeah, Mayor, council member. So I think that is another project that we can look at. It's definitely along the line of organizational analysis. We could pick certain departments. It's a big job to do that citywide. I'm not sure if Gallagher does that type of work, but I think it's certainly something that might be worth looking at and evaluating. Again, it's really hard to do apples to apples, but I think that we can find some comparisons and maybe hire a consultant that would help us look at organization and numbers of positions and structure, right, even top to bottom, which is not really part of what this is for the class and comp. I think it's another topic, but very valuable that we could get some information back
I just think that, again, just in the training that I've been over 30, 40 years, it just seems like we have the cart before the horse here. We should determine how many people we really need in each department, and then how many people do the supervisors really manage and that type of thing before we get into the salaries. And Alan, you can maybe comment more on that because you're more experienced with it, but to me, that's the way it looks. So.
And to Shelley's point, this wasn't a staffing study or an administrative study or things like that. It was really focused on, and I totally understand what you're saying in terms of full understanding of the job, but we kind of had to use job descriptions and things like that as our source for comparisons at this time.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Any other
Thank you.
questions from any council members? Okay. Shelley or Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or? Okay, very good.
I did want to ask,
Uh-huh.
I didn't have a question for Alan, but I did want to ask Shelley a question.
Yeah.
So, I guess I better fire up here.
Yep.
Thank you. I understand the equality of pay and making sure that, our salaries are equal for job and position, et cetera. How is the city of Caldwell, all employees aren't performing equally. You have some less, some more. How do we build in that recognition of a subpar employee versus outstanding performer, how do we build that in when we're talking about our wage structure?
Mayor, council member, all good. So we are working on a performance evaluation tool, if you will. The city had a prior tool that had to do with evaluating KRAs, and so that hasn't been used for a couple of years. And so I'm working with, I had a focus group with supervisors, and we're working on creating an evaluation tool that's going to be meaningful feedback to employees, but also that can be used as a piece of the compensation, right? So a lot of times we've been giving COLAs, and maybe we need to look at giving some COLAs and then also have a component of performance. And so you've got to have a way to evaluate that performance. And so, as Alan was talking about, the first thing that we're going to look at, and Matt is working on the numbers right now, but with the new pay grades, where those land, we want to make sure everybody is within the pay grade, so within the minimum and the maximum. And that's the first thing. And we want to look at what is that going to cost, because remember, we had 6% budgeted across all departments, all positions, all departments for this project. And so we're going to be looking at that money and seeing what that'll cost. The next thing we want to do is work with department managers and say, okay, how long or how should people move through the wages, move through the ranges? And so that's that compensation philosophy. And so if you say by 5 years they should meet at the midpoint, right, or 10 years or whatever that looks like, then we look at our staff and say, where are they? But we also have to look at, along with longevity, we have to look at performance. And so where is the placement? And as Alan talked about, we have compensation or compression at the bottom. So we got rid of the hiring part of the pay range, and now the minimum is the true minimum, which is really good, and that's progress towards where we need to go, but it kind of compressed everybody at the bottom. So the second piece of this is looking at where everybody needs to go within those ranges. And so it's going to be kind of a part one, this, part two, this, part three, this. But yeah, I think performance is an important part of compensation.
Yeah, I like this. I just want to make sure our supervisors have the ability to recognize outstanding performance and also subpar performance, and not treat everybody equal when it comes to that kind of situation, if I'm making sense there.
Yes, and so that's sometimes what a COLA does, right? It's across the board, and it doesn't recognize performance. So I do think building in performance is going to be a piece that we want to look at going forward for compensation. But you have to have a good tool and a way to do that. And we have to train our supervisors in how to evaluate performance fairly, right? In my career, some of the times and the things that have caused the most conflict in the workplace have been performance evaluations. A lot of businesses are trending away from them. I really think there's still value in us doing them, but I think if we're going to do them, we have to do them well, and they have to be meaningful and kind of a living document, not just a one-time summary. So that's kind of the format that we're working on, and hopefully we'll be able to train our supervisors and get something implemented in early 2024, so then we can use it and maybe have that, at least a trial in place, that then we can use that for compensation for the next budget, pay increases, and we can tweak it. If it doesn't work or we get poor feedback, or, we can always kind of try it and tweak things as we go along. So, but that's kind of the plan for that.
Any other questions for any staff? Okay, thank you so much, really appreciate you. And Matt, it's great to see you. He's a wonderful new employee. Super excited to have him here, be part of the city. He's a huge asset for us, so thank you so much for being here. Okay, then that would wrap up our workshop at this time, so we will adjourn for now and return at 6 p.m. to begin our regularly scheduled city council meeting.